UFC 317 is on Saturday at T-Mobile. Going to be a wonderful card. Who better to talk to, of course, than my good friend, I call him the GOAT, Jon Anik. Jon is the UFC play-by-play broadcaster, joins me now. Jon, thank you. How are you, my friend?
Always good to chop it up with you, especially in advance of the biggest week of my calendar year. I say that because of the Hall of Fame induction ceremony on Thursday. I'm wearing a tuxedo for the first time in my life, I think.
Whoa.
So, yeah, I mean, it's just a really nice suit, I guess, right? But I guess that's exciting. But yeah, it's a big week, and we'll see if Ilia Topuria is all the rage. It's crazy to see his fellow fighters talk about him, and we'll see if he can deliver against a very dangerous man.
We'll get into that in a little bit. I wrote a column today on Topuria, and I talked about, I said, you can't quantify what makes someone a superstar, but I used the old Supreme Court line of, I know it when I see it. And I think Ilia Topuria is like right there. You beat Charles Oliveira, and he has all those ingredients to be a Ronda Rousey, a GSP, a Chuck Liddell, a guy on that line. And I think this is a really good fight for him to make that next step, because Charles Oliveira is never in a boring fight.
Well, the danger factor with Charles is so high, and it's interesting when you look at past fights involving Charles and how guys navigate it when they hurt him, because it really is a case of pick your poison. But perhaps there's no fighter that is truer about than Topuria, who started jiu-jitsu when he was 4 years old and, is this world-class grappler that is knocking everybody clean out. It's a fascinating fight. I'm curious when I sit down with Topuria in the fighter meeting, and I don't want to sort of go in this direction, but to what extent was he guaranteed a championship opportunity in moving up to 55? Because I had heard rumblings that he was going to fight Charles, and, he would have fought him even if a belt wasn't on the line. I think it just speaks to the confidence of Topuria as he moves up. And yeah, I can't wait to get to Vegas here shortly.
We'll get into that in a little bit. Big news is Jon Jones, the UFC heavyweight champ, retired. I will get that out in 1 second, but I just want to run through your thoughts on UFC Baku, and especially the main event, because I thought it was a really interesting main event from the standpoint that the fight wasn't as great as I thought it would be. I thought it was really going to be a knockdown, drag-out brawl, and it really wasn't that. But I thought we saw Khalil Rountree really take a step forward in his career. He had been on a winning streak before he fought Alex Pereira in October, loses that fight in a fun, entertaining battle. But I thought he'd come back and fought a tough guy in Jamal Hill, and he really showed that, he learned from that event, and that I think he is a legitimate contender in that division. What was your take?
I agree with you. Expectations are resentments in waiting, right? I don't know what fan expectation was relative to the entertainment value of the fight, but what were Khalil Rountree's expectations? That if he fought Jamal's fight, that he could get knocked clean out by a very powerful athlete. So I agree with you. And, Dean Thomas, my colleague, who I call him the ambassador, right? We can have no better ambassador for our sport than MMA. But as analysts, we have to be critical. And I should say they, because I'm a play-by-play guy. But he was suggested that Khalil Rountree Jr. is not necessarily a world-class elite championship level fighter. And he said it as respectfully as you could.
Right.
A lot of us respectfully disagree. And I think a win over Jamal Hill sort of speaks to that. And I think Khalil's very competitive against a lot of elite guys in the division, fought the right fight. He will absolutely mangle your lead leg if you let him. And I think it's a really hard sport, right? If you win a basketball game 84-82, it's just a green stripe, right? But in this sport, you seem to need style points at times, and maybe this didn't have enough of them for some people. But it was a great win in my mind and yours.
One last thing on Rountree. I said this to him before the fight. I thought he made a mistake against Pereira. Not that, he tricked Pereira or anything, but he said, I have never shot for a takedown in my career. And to me, it's like, you're laying your hand out there, right? I'm not going to do this. And you're taking at least a threat away from the game. He didn't particularly do that again against Jamal Hill, right? And if you are one-dimensional like that, where people go into these fights, Magomed Ankalaev knows, hey, this guy is a striker and a great kickboxer, but I don't have to worry about him trying to shoot on me, and I don't have to defend these other things. That makes him lesser. Is that the conundrum that he faces? He's got to add something more to his game?
It's a great question. And here's the problem, right? I'm afraid to gas out in a workout class in which I'm the only male with a bunch of women who can out
Lucky
gas.
you.
And I do think, right. But when you wrestle and you commit to wrestling and mixing it up, I think a lot of people are afraid to gas out and afraid about the energy expenditure that if they fight completely on instinct, right? And yes, you can do it as much as you seemingly want to in training, and you could be a sponge and all of those things. But I just think, I don't know, man, like if I was in a mixed martial arts fight, I'd be afraid to gas out in front of a million people. And I think that plays into it. But I believe in Khalil Rountree Jr. And I do think when it comes to like discipline and appetite for training, he's got so many boxes checked.
Amazing.
So I'm excited to see his progression. And I think a main event against Yuri Prochazka or Dominic Reyes makes a lot of sense.
He is a guy that, has had an up and down career, but a guy who hasn't had an up and down career has only been up, at least inside the octagon, is Johnny Bones Jones, right? Were you shocked, first of all, Dana announces kind of at the press conference afterwards in answer to a question that Jones retired? And I thought at least if Jones retired, we would have International Fight Week, a press conference called, and give the man his flowers, right? And, instead it's announced at a post-fight press conference like, oh, by the way, Jon Jones has just retired. It overshadowed the entire card in Baku. Were you surprised the way it played out?
Not surprised, but not a great note upon which to go out if you are Jon Jones, who myself and others believe is the greatest mixed martial arts athlete that we have ever seen. But I think the real news, Kev, is that Jon Jones, according to Dana, accepted the fight and was of an competitive nature for this fight at one point in time. And what changed, only Jon Jones knows. And I don't know if we'll ever get the answer as to why he wanted to fight Tom Aspinall and then didn't. Is part of it legacy preservation? Is part of it because he thinks he can realize that monetary gain elsewhere? There are a lot of different factors. I think for Jon Jones, it might just be like the Hunger Games, right? How much hunger was there to put in 6 months of good hard training to try to beat Tom Aspinall? And that just might be a big part of it. Now, I don't know that, in the eyes of some fans, right, losing to Tom Aspinall would have been better to his legacy than not fighting the man at all. But it is what it is. George St. Pierre wasn't criticized for coming back and fighting Michael Bisping for the middleweight championship and not defending it. And, I just think fans don't want to be misled, and they want to know that you're of clear intention. And, I think a lot of fans feel like they were a little bit misled here.
I have said repeatedly, and I'll say it again to you, John, I don't think Jon Jones was afraid of Tom Aspinall, right? Now, there may have been other aspects in there where, it influenced his decision. But here's where I thought he made a mistake. If he would have fought Stipe Miocic in 2023, then, that fight to me just got a little out of hand because Stipe hadn't fought in like 3+ years. John had the one fight in, basically 4+ years. Stipe at that point is coming off a loss, was 42 years old. That whole narrative. You say, I want to fight Stipe instead of fighting Tom Aspinall, who clearly has a style that matches up well with John. And now then you go on this whole run, pay me the big dollars and you'll see me there. They do apparently pay him the big dollars because he agrees, and then he doesn't do it. And to me, I don't think he's afraid, but I think he's making a very poor decision. And I think it's a decision he's going to regret down the road.
Yeah.
Because as great as he is, and I agree with you, he's the greatest of all time. What are people going to talk about when they say Jon Jones? But yeah, he didn't fight. He walked away from Tom Aspinall.
Right. Right. And the extent to which he strung the promotion along, you don't know, right? Dana didn't throw him under the bus or anything like that. You just don't know how it all went down backstage. And maybe because he's such a hoss and a promotional draw that promotionally you hold out hope that in December in Las Vegas, you can put a capstone on the year if you hold out hope. And John is sort of maybe 1 foot in, 1 foot out, but in some part he wants to do the fight. You give him the benefit of the doubt. But I don't know, again, when it comes back to expectations, that we should have thought that he was going to fight on our calendar or turn around in 6 or 8 months and fight. To your point, how much has he fought since he fought Dominic Reyes at UFC 247 or whatever it was in 2020? Now, I know there
Yeah,
was
so
a
he fought twice. Yeah.
So my whole thing was he fights in November of 2024 against Stipe, right? And by the way, Stipe had a fucking 4-year layoff. Sorry if we're
Right.
not swearing here, you know? So that fight happens November of 2024. What was our expectation as to when Jon Jones was going to turn it around? December
A year.
2025?
Well, a year. So
Right.
I thought, and Dana said Saturday that the plan was for him to fight at Madison Square Garden, which is what I had reported a number of times. I reported the fight was done, agreed upon. Both sides agreed on the money. Both sides agreed on everything. They were just waiting on the date, and then it would be Madison Square Garden if Jon agreed to do it. And then he changed. So we were asking him only to fight once a year, right? That's it.
Right, right, right. And I think, again, when he first came out and said, I need 6 months, everybody was up in arms. And I do think that Jon probably wrestled with this. And I think the best thing he could do, not that he gives a rip about public image in terms of this part of it, but would be to come out and address some of these things. But Kenny Florian said on our podcast today, people are always going to want more from these fighters, right? And thankfully, you and I have been able to sort of keep the focus on the fighting, and we could have a different conversation when it comes to some of the out of the octagon stuff, but people are always going to want more, right? And if he beats Tom in a contentious split decision, that's the fight of the year, and then he wants to walk off, is it enough?
Yeah.
And that says nothing of, my belief that Jon can make a lot of money as an actor because he's willing and able, and he has honestly got a tremendous vocal quality that is a God gift, just like his MMA talent. So I wish him the best.
I do. What do you think was his best performance? Like when you look back on Jon Jones, where do you say, hey, this was peak Jon Jones?
When he unceremoniously dumped Lyoto Machida on his head and left him for dead. I mean, the first UFC live event I ever attended was his UFC debut, UFC 87 at the Target Center, Minneapolis, Minnesota,
I
when he
was
fought
there.
Andre Gusmao, right? And on it went. And I met him in his hotel room, right, when he foiled the robbery. I interviewed him for ESPN Sports Center when he beat Shogun for the title. But my brother, when he dumped Lyoto like that, I mean, he had already arrived, but my goodness, what a visual.
Yeah, certainly the Shogun Hua fight was an amazing performance too, because everybody's going, hey, this is one of the all-time greats, and Hua, and Jones is a young guy coming up. Is he ready for this? Blah, 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 blah. And my Lord, did he step up there? But, I want to say this. I want to say I think it was his first DC fight, right? Because I think, you're looking at, if Jon Jones isn't there, DC might be in the conversation as the greatest fighter of all time, right? Because I think you have to look at the aftermath of what happened, right? DC loses those 2 fights to Jon, and then, things change. But had he beaten Jon, I don't know that he even gets to Stipe down the road, right? He wins that and he walks away. And DC was so good, and especially in that first fight that they fought, you're looking at the captain of the U.S. Olympic wrestling team getting ragdoll around by a junior college wrestler. And I'm not trying to insult him by saying that, but I'm just trying to draw a contrast. Somebody who was the captain of the U.S. Olympic wrestling team versus somebody who competed in junior college and wrestling. And that was an amazing performance.
There's no doubt about it. I do think in terms of the greatest fighters of all time, somehow Daniel Cormier wrongfully gets lost in that discussion. But it wasn't just leaving all sorts of different legends in Jon's wake, right? It was the manner in which he did it. And most of those guys really were, if not in their fighting prime, still pretty close to it, right? Like it's hard to denigrate those individual wins. But yeah, I mean, the Daniel Cormier-Jon Jones rivalry is the greatest in the sport's history as far as I'm concerned. And he got the best of DC every time out and was better for it. It's miraculous to think about, some of the things that maybe preceded certain title defenses like the Alexander Gustafsson fight.
I was just going to ask you about that.
Yeah. Some of the things that, Jon maybe was or wasn't doing in the lead up to these absolutely epic fights. And I do think when it comes down to Jon Jones, for me, I guess it's less about a singular win. It's just about desire and just that mean spirit and the heart and, the willingness to just fell another man. But yes, I mean, heart and durability and bravery. And he just has everything if you were crafting the perfect fighter. We've been talking a lot about bravery recently on our show. And, Jon was certainly brave when he knew he hadn't had like a preceding training camp that was the right result. Yeah. So.
Yeah, the late Stephan Bonnar, I talked to him, and it was 2009, 2010, after they had fought. And one of the things he said to me was, the problem, you're never safe when you fight Jon Jones because he has such great, length in his legs. He takes 2 steps and he's all the way across the octagon. And he said, so you're never away from him. You're never safe. You want to maybe take a break and move away and kind of reset, but he's always within a step and a half or 2 steps of you. And Bonnar, I thought that was an interesting point, that, you never have time where you can kind of reset and catch your breath a quick second and then go back at him. The fact that, he puts that pressure on you, and then it becomes it's a physical pressure to start, but then it becomes a mental pressure.
That's why what Rafael Fiziev was able to do against the long Ignacio Bahamondes on the weekend was otherworldly. But yeah, I mean, if I were Daniel Cormier, Kev, I would be like, do you guys understand that Jon Jones has a foot in reach on me, 84 inches to 72 inches? I would be screaming that from the rooftops. I'd be like, hey, guys, if you give me 77 inches, I beat Jon Jones. But with 72, what do you want me to do? But exactly. Yes, I mean, tremendous genetic advantage that he was able to absolutely maximize, right? And I do think in his sort of mental prime for the game, nobody had a bigger appetite for MMA greatness and studying film and patterns and the ability to use that length. I mean, even when you look at what may or may not be his last fight. I mean, I asked Kenny Florian if he thought this would be his last fight, and he actually thinks he's going to come back in a couple years. But if his last moment is that kick executed on Stipe, even if Stipe is 55 years old, right? Yeah. That's a pretty amazing.
Pretty good way to go out. Yeah. Let's we got a couple of minutes. Let's finish up on UFC 317, and I want to get you to give your thoughts on the title fights. But I want to ask you first about a fight that I'm really intrigued by, because I think this fighter is going to be, one of the next big things, and that's Joshua Van against Brandon Royval. I love Joshua Van and what I'm seeing out of this kid. He's fighting Royval. Royval, is the number 1 flyweight in the world. He's minus 230, plus 175 for Joshua. But do you see a big future for Van, and do you see Van as being a champion someday?
23 years of age, 8th youngest fighter on the roster. He's already accrued 7 UFC wins. I don't have to tell you, he fought on our last pay-per-view a few weeks ago, and now he's stepping up and facing the number 1 contender, Brandon Royval. And yet he's only the slightest of underdogs. It's essentially a pick'em right now, which is, but one lens through which to look at the fight. But I think it's pretty telling. The kid's the real deal. He just hasn't been wrestling and grappling that long. So this is a particularly interesting stylistic challenge. And the short notice nature of it, I think, is interesting. But yeah, I mean, Joshua Van has time on his side. And I think that's why it's okay to accept this opportunity, even if in a total strategic mindset, maybe you would think there were some downside to it. But Royval deserves credit as well, right? Putting his number 1 ranking on the line against anyone, anytime, anywhere. So it's a hugely exciting fight. And, when you talk about bulletproof matchmaking, this is it, right? There are certain fights that just, and I could say the same about the main event, probably the co-main event as well. They just, they can't not be good.
I think the co-main event is interesting because Pantoja's got 3 title defenses. A guy that doesn't get a lot of acclaim. I don't think he gets the respect that his skills have deserved. Look at the people that he's beaten throughout his career. And you're going in against Kai Kara-France, a guy that's been there at the top, kind of a couple times moved up. The fight with Brandon Moreno certainly was a big loss for him. But I'm intrigued by that fight. I like Pantoja. I think even though Pantoja's 35 and, seemingly, those lighter weight fighters, that's probably kind of the make or break age, right? Sometimes, it's like you seem like you fall off after that. We have seen none of that from Pantoja. What do you expect from Pantoja in that bout?
One of my favorite fighters in the sport, Alexandre Pantoja. You can't worry about Demetrius Johnson's 11 straight.
Nobody's getting there.
Title defenses. You just got to focus on what's in front of you, and that's a very powerful Kai Kara-France. And it has me thinking in the fighter meeting, like, what do you do against Alexandre Pantoja? You fought the guy on The Ultimate Fighter, and I guess what was an exhibition fight in 2016. Right. But when you're preparing for this guy, what exactly are you doing, right? What are you doing differently in terms of dealing with the pace and the pressure and knowing that, yeah, I mean, you're sort of the knockout button guy. You're the
Right.
death touch guy in the division, but yet this guy has never been finished in, essentially 50 fights when you include all the amateur and the exhibition for Pantoja. How do you actually put this guy away? So I'm very curious to hear what Kai Kara-France has done in terms of the preparation. But yes, I mean, special doesn't even begin to describe Pantoja, great Muay Thai striker, but grappling is his world. And I just think sometimes when I use adjectives, it sounds trite, but like he's so relentless. Like he just is undeniable in terms of the forward motion and just the way he disposed of Kaya Sakura. Just have so much respect for Pantoja's legacy. And, he's already a Hall of Fame fighter no matter what happens this weekend. But that's why they play the games. A lot of power coming back his way.
And let's wrap very quickly on Ilia versus Charles. And, one of the things I want to get your take on is, Ilia, you referenced at the beginning, has the ability to knock guys out with either hand, and he's got the great grappling and everything. But I also think, that confidence that he has, there's something, and Jon Jones had that, right? I'm beating you. I am better than you. There's no doubt how this is going to end. I am going to win it. And I think that, almost puts pressure on guys, right? That it puts that mental pressure on, he doesn't seem to be phased. And look what he did to Max Holloway. People are talking about him being a small lightweight, but Max Holloway was a legit lightweight. We know that. And when they fought for the featherweight title, Max, I mean, he was a big dude, right? And when he rehydrated, and Ilia had no issues with him. Charles said something I thought was interesting. He said he was talking about the power in his hands. And I don't know that if I am Charles Oliveira with those great submissions that he has, that I want to be relying on the power in my hands against Ilia Topuria.
Fair, but I got to tell you, Justin Gaethje has said the hardest man he has ever been hit by, without hesitation, was Charles do Bronx Oliveira. So definitely does have a lot of power. But yeah, I mean, I think there are maybe paths of least resistance that don't necessarily involve a kickboxing match with Ilia Topuria. But I think Charles has a lot of confidence, and I think he has a lot of confidence in his preparation and in his gym and in his team. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see him pull guard. He's a fascinating fighter with which to deal for Ilia Topuria, and I'm fascinated to see, this 5'6" Ilia Topuria, try to become the UFC welterweight champion after this, so
that's incredible.
It's a great fight, but I can't overstate just how telling it is to hear the fellow fighters talk about Ilia Topuria. Corey Sandhagen just like deadpans, like with respect to Charles. I just think, Ilia's going to knock him out. And I think for Ilia, just the vision, right? As Volkanovski said, the focus in those critical moments. A lot of it's just straight athleticism and there's bravery. I just think vision, focus, he's got it all.
I would keep you here and keep going, but I know you are busy in demand on Fight Week. The great Jon Anik, I appreciate you, brother. Always good to talk to you. We will see you in Vegas.
Much love, brother.
See you, bro.